Hello! In this video I'm showing you how to add some inhibitor or some system cleaner or possibly some leak sealer or in fact any other chemical you might want to add into your central heating system. So this is an update of my original video of how to add chemicals into your central heating system. Now I had a great response to that video, but reading through the comments I could see there are quite a few people who still had some questions. So in this updated video I'm going to answer all those questions so you should then know exactly what you're doing. So I'm going to go through a couple of those questions now, the rest I'll leave to the end of the video, so make sure you stick around for those. Very quickly, why do we want to add inhibitor to our central heating system? Now the main reason I would say is to stop corrosion. Our radiators are made of steel, we add water to the radiators, water rusts steel, that rust turns into magnetite, that black stuff you find in the bottom radiators, and that black stuff kills boilers. It also helps prevent limescale and gases building up, and all round it just helps lubricate the system. Now it's a really good idea to try and stick to the same brand as is already in your central heating system. So have a look on your boiler and see if you can see a label telling you what inhibitor is in your system, and then try and use the same brand. Now I'm adding this inhibitor directly into a radiator. Now several people suggested that adding it into the loft tank if you've got a traditional system. The problem with adding it to a loft tank is it just sits in top of a loft tank and then you have to drain some water off to get it out of the loft tank, and even then you're not sure how much you drained out because it's all mixed with water, so it's always best to add it directly into your central heating system. That leads me nicely onto filters. So if you have a magnetic filter like the MagnaClean filter where you can take the lid off, it's much easier to add the inhibitor into a filter like that. Now if you have a Valiant filter or a Spirotech filter or some kind of filter where you've got a 3/4 connection, then I made a video on the easiest way to add inhibitor into one of those, and that's by using this rapid dose system. And of course you can find both of those videos in the cards above now and also down in the description. So just before I get on with the video, quite a few people ask how much inhibitor do you need? Well, this pot here, they say that it will treat between 8 and 10 radiators. So if you've got a big system with big radiators, then maybe you want 2 pots. But in general, this should treat a whole system with no problem at all. And of course, we only need to drain off as much water as is in this pot here, which is just 1 litre. But of course, I'll go into more detail on that in the video. Right, now let's get on with adding one of these chemicals to the system. So quick tip for a combination boiler or a sealed system, make sure that you know how to top up the system. Make sure that the valves are working, you can open them, make sure that that pressure does rise. We don't want to come here, do the job, bleed the air out, and then find that the boiler stopped working and you can't top it back up. So before you start this job, go and make sure that you can top the boiler up and you see the pressure rise, and then you're all good to go for the job. So this is a nice and straightforward job. First thing that we do is to isolate the radiator by turning off both of the radiator valves. So I turn my thermostatic radiator valve down to its lowest setting, which is its frost setting. Now ideally we want to remove the thermostat and fit on a decorator's cap which would have come with the radiator valve. But most likely you're not going to have one of these, but it just ensures that the thermostatic valve is definitely closed. So I'm going to leave this decorator's cap on and do it up tight, and now that valve is definitely closed. So now we're going to shut this valve. This is called a lock shield valve. Now this might look like it turns, but it doesn't. It's actually locked in position. So we need to undo the screw if it has a screw and then pull the cap off. And now we can get to the spindle and close the radiator valve. Now when I close it, I'm going to count how many turns it takes to close the valve, so that when I open it back up, I open it up the same amount of turns so the system will stay balanced. That's if it was ever balanced in the first place. So let's close this down. 1, 2, 3, 3 and a bit. And I'm just going to nip that up, make sure that's good and tight, because I don't want any water seeping in when I'm trying to put the inhibitor in. So now I have both radiator valves shut, so the radiator is now isolated. And now I'm going to drop the pressure inside the radiator. Now this doesn't matter whether you have an open vented system or a combination boiler system. We're just isolating the radiator and we're going to drop the pressure on it. Now I've loosened that, I'm going to put a bowl here. I'm just going to let the pressure out of the radiator. Now if water continues to keep coming out of here and doesn't stop, then it means that one of your radiator valves is either not shut properly or it's letting water past. If that's the case, we may need to try adding the inhibitor into a different radiator. But then having said that, it does depend on how fast the water keeps coming out. So you can see now that stopped coming out and it's just a steady little drip. And that may stop or it might keep coming. If it's just a little drip, it's probably not going to matter too much. But now I'm just going to close this up. So now both radiator valves are isolated and we've dropped the pressure in the radiator by opening the bleed valve. I'm now going to undo this nut and we're going to let some or all of the water drain out of the radiator. And we're going to catch it in a bowl here. Got my adjustable spanner to put onto the nut here. Now I've seen people say you just undo the nuts, you can hold the pipe, hold the valve and just undo it. Don't do that. You're going to end up with this joint leaking, or you're going to kink the pipe, and then you're going to end up with a whole bunch of problems where you're going to have to then repair the pipe, repair this leak here. So always hold this valve with some kind of spanner like this here. So we just put this spanner on there or any type of other adjustable, and then hold the valve and stop the valve from twisting like that. And then we're going to undo the nut like that. There we go. Okay. I'm going to take this back off again. Now we can just undo the nut here, and then we have to catch the water in the bowl. So just be careful as you undo this and you pull the valve off, you might suddenly get a little spray of water. So just be careful, make sure your walls and your floor is protected, just in case you get some dirty water all of a sudden spraying out. So undo the nut carefully, just wiggling the valve, making sure there's no pressure in there, and there we go. And then catch the water coming out, because you don't want it going all over your carpet. And then just, if it doesn't come out very fast, you can then open up the bleed valve. By opening the bleed valve, you break the airlock which has been created, and then air will start being sucked into the radiator. Now, like I said earlier, you only need to drain off about 1 litre or the same amount and a little bit more than is in your new bottle of inhibitor. Depending on the size of your bowl, you might want to put your radiator valve back on again just to stop it from dripping, empty out your bowl, and then you continue the process if you need to drain off more water. For instance, you might have a very large system and be adding in 2 bottles of inhibitor. If you have a water vacuum like I do, you can speed this process up, and I use this method all the time to drain radiators, and it saves me hours of time and mess because I don't have to catch all that water, I just suck it up with my vacuum. Using my vacuum like this, I can also give the radiator a bit of a flush at the same time by opening the valve at the other end of the radiator. You can see how using my water vacuum really speeds the whole process up, and it also means that if I got any drips, I can easily catch it with my vacuum. And for any job which involves a little bit of water, I always have my water vacuum to hand. So now the radiator is drained of water, we now need to refit this valve back onto this spigot. Now I will always use some joining compound just to put back on the valve and make sure there's no chance that the valve can leak. So I've got some joining compound here. Now this is the joining compound which I would normally use. Okay, and I'm just going to smear this onto the inside of the radiator valve. Now just to show you what I'm doing there, here's another radiator valve here, just to demonstrate. Now when these joints make, it's this inner edge here which does all the sealing. It's not the threads. I see people wrapping PTFE tape around the thread. The thread is just there to hold the valve together. It's this inner edge here which does all the sealing. So I put some paste onto here, or joining compound, just smear it onto the edge like that. Okay, see if you can see that. Okay, and then it's then the olive which does all the sealing. So here's an olive which is on our pipework or on the radiator spigot, and what happens is the olive is pushed up against the radiator valve, and when we do the nut up, it squashes the olive up against the radiator valve and that joining compound, and it creates a seal and stops us from getting any leaks. So I can now put the radiator valve back onto the radiator spigot or the tail and then do up the nut. Now what can you do if you don't have any joining compound? Well, you can use PTFE tape, and I'll show you how to do that now. So I'll take the PTFE tape and just wrap it around the spigot here, not too tightly because we want it to go back and sit against the olive which is on the pipe there. So just get a bit of PTFE tape and just gently wrap it around making a little ring of PTFE tape, like so. Can be a little tricky, just take your time over it, because it's worth getting this right, because we don't want any leaks. There we go, and just snap that off. And there it is. Just wipe that around, so you've got a good joint. And then again, you can then put the valve in there, and then it pushes on, and then you can see the PTFE tape will then push up against the olive and make a good seal. If you have this type of radiator valve, we can't really use PTFE tape. We can only use joining compound to seal this joint. So we just put a little bit around the edge like that, and then that creates the seal when it goes up against the seating. I just want to jump in here and very quickly introduce myself. My name is Mark Ballard and I've been a gas registered engineer for nearly 30 years. The aim of my channel is to help you with your central heating and your plumbing. If you find this video at all useful, then please give me that little bit of feedback by clicking on that thumbs up or the subscribe. You can ring on the bell if you want to receive a notification, and of course you can share the video with your friends. And I'd like to say a really big thank you to everybody who's bought me a cup of coffee and left me a donation in my toolbox fund. It's really appreciated, and it does really help me to make more videos which will hopefully help you. So we're now ready to do up the joint exactly the same as before. We support the radiator valve, then I use my adjustable spanner and do up the nut. Because this has got PTFE tape on, I'm just going to do that a little bit tighter to make sure that PTFE tape is squashed down nice and tightly onto that olive. And there we go. So now we are ready to add the inhibitor into the radiator. A little tip for you here is, if you have the thermostat at one end of the radiator, then I suggest you top it up at the other end, just in case you spill some of the inhibitor and it goes down into the valve, and then it'll make the valve all sticky and maybe not work properly. So obviously the thermostat is on this end here. Obviously I've taken this one off, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to demonstrate by doing it at this end here. So now we're ready to add the inhibitor to the radiator. So what I'm going to do is to remove this plug on the end here. Now sometimes these are recessed in. I can get to this one quite easy with my spanner, but just be careful. You don't want to go scratching your paintwork. Use a socket, or if you've got a box spanner, I have a box spanner which goes onto there, and then I can undo this little plug here like that and remove it. Okay, there we go. So when I undo this, usually a bit of water will run out, so that's why I've got my towel down, and I've got my dust sheet down to make sure that if there is any spills, it's going to get caught by the towel. Okay, and then what I usually use then is a little spigot. So this is a radiator valve spigot, and I just screw that into there, a bit of PTFE tape on it just to seal it. And then I take a bit of hose pipe like this, and this is a little tool which I've made up, and I've used this for years and years and years. It's just basically a cap off a pot, and then I've made a little connection onto it, and then I just put that onto there, and I put the pot on, and I run the inhibitor in. Now you're not likely to have a spigot, so you can do exactly the same thing, but just get a bit of hose pipe, get a funnel. Okay, obviously put the funnel onto the hose pipe, and obviously the hose pipe just about fits in this hole. And then what I'll recommend you do is just get some tape, bit of electrical tape, and just wrap it around the pipe, so you can just make a kind of a seal so the inhibitor won't come out. Because when you put this in here, there's a bit of an elbow here, so it won't just run into the radiator. You're going to get more running out of the radiator than you are running in. So just going to get some tape here, and note how I always wind it around that direction. So we're just going to put it on there like that. Just put several winds onto it like that. That's probably about right. Obviously we don't want to lose any inhibitor, and then you can see that fits in there nicely, and then we can just screw this bit of hose pipe into there, okay, and seal it, okay, in there. Obviously you spend a bit of time doing it, you're going to get a good seal on there, but I'm going to do it my way. So I've got my spigot. I put my spigot on here. Now I'm going to get my pot of inhibitor. So this is Sentinel X100. This is a very well known brand, and boiler manufacturers recommend it. Now you know if you've got a new pot, because you always have a seal on the top like that. So you've got to break that seal first of all, so we can get the X100 out. So I'm just going to take that cap off there like that. And now I can attach my tool onto the pot. So I just screw that on. I'll make sure it's nice and tight because I don't want the pot leaking. And then I just take the hose pipe and I just wiggle it onto the spigot like that. And there we go. And I've been doing it this way for years and years and years. And then we just basically just let the inhibitor glug it into the radiator. Now just bear in mind that if you've got a very small radiator, you're not going to get a litre of inhibitor into it. But this radiator should be big enough to take that litre. And we just slowly just squeeze it a little bit. Not too hard because we don't want to burst the pipe off. Okay, and just keep going. And obviously with your funnel, just pour it into the funnel. But I'm just gradually squeezing this and just letting it go into the radiator. Like that. Don't know if you can hear that going in. It's nearly gone. And there we go. So that's all gone now. So now it's now filled up the radiator. It's only partly filled it. And we just take this off. Okay, put that to one side. Like that. Now when you remove your hose from your radiator or whatever little fitting you've used, you'll always get a little bit of inhibitor run out of the radiator. So just be prepared to catch that with an old towel. But I'll show you what I do in just a second. So now I'm ready to refit the blanking plug. Now very importantly, when we look at this blanking plug, make sure that this O-ring which is on this blanking plug is in good condition. Or better still, replace it all together, because we don't want to put it in and then find in a couple of weeks it started leaking. Because then we'll have to go through parts of this process again to replace the blanking plug. And you can pretty much get these blanking plugs from any DIY store, and they aren't very expensive. I'll leave you a shopping link in the description. Now I have made a video on how to repair your blanking plug. Here's a brief description of how you do that. You can fix this with PTFE tape. What I'd say is to take the O-ring off and then wrap lots of PTFE tape round. You can do it up tight and then take it off again, wrap some more to PTFE tape, because this is like a recessed fitting here for the O-ring to fit into. So just putting some PTFE tape over and doing it up the first time, that won't be enough. You've got to keep doing it several times, but that will seal it. And I like to see a good sort of squeeze of PTFE tape, and that takes some time to do that, but you can do it that way. But the best way obviously is just to buy a new one, get a new O-ring, put it on there if you're in any doubt if that O-ring is any good. Now, like I said, when we remove the hose or the fitting, we're going to get some inhibitor run out. So I just very quickly swap them over. So you can see I'm all ready to go, and I just take the fitting out and then straight away pop the little blanking plug back in. This way I hardly get any run out. But then it is only about a tablespoon, but it stops it from running down the radiator and maybe going onto your valves and your thermostat. And that's why I've swapped ends and I do it at this end, because like I said, you always get a little bit run out. And it ends up being really sticky and it will bung up the thermostat. Now you can see I've got my box spanner and I'm going to do up this blanking plug. Now you want to do this up really tight, so you can't turn it anymore, because I regularly see these leaking where people haven't tightened them up enough. And what seems to happen is the O-ring shrinks a little over time and then they start leaking. And of course we don't want any leaks, so make sure it's really tight. Now I'm ready to open up the radiator valves. Now you remember this one was 3.5 turns, so I'm going to open this one up by 3.5 turns. So as you open up the valve, you'll hear some water going into the radiator. There you go, a little bit. And then we can put this cap back on, like that. You can put the little screw back in. And do that up. So I just got a cloth, I'm just going to wipe this down, make sure we haven't got any sticky inhibitor left on the radiator, just to keep it all looking nice and shiny and new. So now I've added the inhibitor into the radiator. So we've got some inhibitor in here and we still got some air. So now I'm going to remove this cap off this valve here, and I'm going to put the thermostat back in its place. And then it's just a case of bleeding the radiator and letting out the remaining air. You may notice that on this bleed valve, you've got this white piece here. These things turn around. Sometimes people worry about like this. They think there's some sort of fault. That's quite normal. They're supposed to rotate around. So you can point that little hole where the water comes out, point it and direct it into a bowl or into your rag. That's providing someone hasn't painted it and filled it up with paint. And there we go. Now we've bled all the air out of the radiator. If you have an open vented system with loft tank, there's nothing we need to do. If you have a combination boiler, you now need to go to the combination boiler and top up the pressure. You should top it up to 1 to 1.5 bar and then come back again and check for leaks. Now the best way to check for leaks is to use a bit of kitchen roll or toilet paper. Just fold it in half or just use the edge and just go around all the joints and just touch it up against the joint to make sure that you don't get any sudden little marks of dampness on there. And that is the best way you can check for leaks. And that's my top tip for spotting leaks. And I use this method all the time to find leaks. And of course, don't forget to do the top one. You can do this one, you can do the one on the other side. A little tip for you, on a lot of these containers, there's a label on the side. You can peel the label off, go and stick it on your boiler and write down the dates that you put the inhibitor in the system, so then you know exactly when it was put in last. When you're finished, don't forget, go and put your central heating on, get the water circulating around so all your radiators get nice and hot, so all that inhibitor gets mixed in and your system is protected. To answer a few more of those questions, it's always a good idea to look around and choose the best radiator to put it in. Usually a radiator at the top of the house is better, just because there's less pressure in it, or maybe choose one where there's no carpet, so you've got a hard floor, so if you make any mess, it's not going to go on your carpet. If you're replacing a radiator, that's a really good time to add some inhibitor. You could possibly just partly fill the radiator to check for leaks, and then you can add the inhibitor like I've just shown you in the video. Now another really good place to add some inhibitor is into a towel rail. Now if you have a blanking plug on top of the radiator, which you can remove, you could then put a tube down inside the radiator and you can siphon off some of the water. So we only need to siphon off 1 litre, then we can add the inhibitor, put the blanking plug back in, and then we don't need to mess about the radiator valves on the bottom of the radiator. Now, how often should you add some inhibitor to your system? Well, whenever you do some work, like take a radiator off, then obviously you should add some more inhibitor then. Now, Fernox, they actually recommend adding it annually because over time it loses its effectiveness. Now, you can buy a little test kit for each brand to test how much inhibitor is in your system, but if you're in any doubt, it's always best just to add some more inhibitor. Now, a few people ask, should you add some cleaner at the same time? No, you shouldn't add cleaner at the same time, but you can add cleaner to your system. You can run the system, clean it through, then drain it down as flushing it out, refill it with fresh water, and then you can add your inhibitor then. Now, all the manufacturers will recommend cleaning your system out first of all, but if you've got a newer system or even a system that's really nice and clean, then you don't need to go cleaning it. You just need to add some inhibitor to keep the system running nice and smoothly. Now, can you have too much inhibitor in your system? The answer to that is no. This stuff is specially designed to help your system, so it stops gases from building up, it lubricates parts, and really importantly is it stops corrosion, which is that black stuff which you find in the bottom of your radiators called magnetite, and that stuff kills boilers. It keeps everything just running really well. All manufacturers of boilers will tell you to have inhibitor in your system. So adding a pot of this every year or every couple of years is not going to do your system any harm at all. Now, what happens when you've got a radiator that doesn't have that large blanking plug and you've only got a small bleed screw like this? Well, then you can use something like this rapid dosing system where you inject the inhibitor into your radiator or chemicals of some description. But of course, this is more expensive, but it is a bit easier. So maybe you want to check out my other video about how you go about using this. One last question that came up a couple of times, do you need to change the olive on the radiator when you come to refit the valve? No, the old olive should be absolutely fine unless it looks completely chewed up. Right, that's about it then. So I do hope my video has been helpful if you wanted to get that inhibitor into your system. Now, if you want to know how to replace a leaking radiator valve, you can click on that link just there. If you've got a radiator that's not getting hot, then maybe you want to click on that link just there. And of course, you can click on subscribe, ring on the bell, share it with your friends, give me a thumbs up, and there's always my toolbox friend. Bye for now. See you next time.